Porters developed a language and a history that grew out of the common experience. They shared this experience from coast to coast, north and south, singing and telling stories to help pass the times while waiting for their assignment. It took the edge off of being away from home and their loved ones. Train stations provided quarters for porters called porterhouses, sitting around a baker heated leak, a large pot-belly stove. The first porters told tales, jokes, real life stories that in time developed into a communication network peculiar to themselves. For example, if something happened in New York on Friday, porters in every state would know about it on Sunday. Political news, a good joke, style changes, even a girl's telephone number could be passed from New York to Chicago to Los Angeles, from Minneapolis to St. Louis to New Orleans. This special brotherhood became known as the Baker Heater League. As older porters died or retired, their stories became part of a railroad lore, and their legacy helped to reshape and mold new heroes and legends. Just as lumberjacks created their superheroes, Paul Bunyan and cowboys sang about Wally Pecos Bill, railroaders had Casey Jones and John Henry. John Luther Jones, better known as Casey Jones, was an engineer on a Cannonball number 382. On the evening of April 29, 1900, Casey and his black fireman, Sim Webb, prepared to take Cannonball from Memphis to Canton. The scheduled engineer was out ill. The train left at 12:50 a.m. and an hour and 30 minutes late. Casey was determined to make up for lost time. Through a series of mishaps and miscommunication, Casey's train crashed. Although the brave engineer could have jumped to safety, he stayed with the train and saved many lives on the cost of his own. Casey Jones became a railroad hero and many songs were written about him. Fireman jumped, but Casey stayed on. He was a good engineer, but he's dead and gone. Legend tells of another storm that goes. When John Henry was a little boy, he was sitting on his papa's knee. He was looking down on a piece of steel, saying, "A steel driving man I'll be. Lord, Lord, a steel driving man I'll be." The real John Henry, believed to be a newly freed slave from North Carolina, joined the West Virginia steel driving team hired to dig out the Big Bend Tunnel of the C&O Railroad circa 1870. Many stories detail the life and adventures of this 200-pound, 6-foot man who was so strong he could drive steel with a hammer in each hand. John Henry's death occurred after competing with the steam drill, winning and then dying. The steam drill sit on the right hand side. John Henry was on the left. He said, "I'll beat that steam drill down or I hammer my fool self to death." Casey Jones and John Henry belonged to all the railroaders. But Pullman Porters had their very own hero in Daddy Joe. Daddy Joe was a real person, but like most legends, his exploits were greatly exaggerated. One story establishing legend, if in fact, if that Daddy Jones was the first Pullman Porter. He was said to have stood so tall and to have large hands so powerful he could walk flat-footed down the aisle and slid up the upper berths on each side. Whenever a storyteller wanted to make a point about courtesy, honesty, or an outstanding job performance, he used a Daddy Joe story. And a tale about him being unusually began with the most terrific who ever made down a berth was Daddy Joe. Then the teller would tell a story like this one. Hostile Indians were said to attack in a train at a water tank. The all white passengers were terrified. But Daddy Joe, with no regard for Pullman rules or his own safety, climbed up on top of the train and spoke to the Indians in their own language. Afterwards, Daddy Joe threw a Pullman blanket to each member of the attacking party, and added a blessing at the end. The Indians left the train past safely. Whether he was facing hurricanes, high waters, fires, robbers, or Indians, Daddy Joe was always masterfully dealt with the situation. Legend had it that he even thwarted one of Jesse James' attempted robberies. Daddy Joe got so many tips from passengers he was said to be burdened down with silver and gold. The first porters who created Daddy Joe in their own image were proud of him. He represented the qualities they valued and unquestionable loyalty and dedication to the job. New railroad employees were always a source of a good laugh, too.
This new brakeman story, or one like it, was a porterhouse favorite. It began with a young college graduate who got a yearning to work on the railroad. So he traded in his suit and tie for a rusty railroad blues. Right away, he was hired as a brakeman on the Knox and Lincoln line. On his first run, the engineer was having a very hard time getting the freight up the steep hill. After getting the train over, the engineer called out, "I was afraid she'd stall, and that train will roll back." The new brakeman smiled broadly and assured the engineer, "No chance of that happening," he said, beaming with pride. "Before we started, I went back and set the brakes." Amid thigh slapping laughter, another tale would begin with, "Did you hear the story about the flagman?" Of course, they'd heard the story 100 times, but each teller added or subtracted something until the tale was his own. Now that's how tales stayed fresh and original.